I think the passion came later on in my career, in my early days with GE, the idea of finding a better way to make something. I mean, it's interesting to make things. Mm-hmm. It's even more fun to find a better way to make it. And I'm sure we'll get into that.
Get into that. A quick interruption to remind you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Hey, it's Ari Santiago. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. I am so excited to have Doug Folsom, CEO of Witcraft, here today. Witcraft is one of the dynamic aerospace manufacturing suppliers in Connecticut. Doug, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, listen, man, it's the Made in America podcast, so we start off with the same two questions. What do you make, and why do you make it?
I was aware that was coming up. So we make aircraft engine components, probably not unlike a lot of our peers around the greater Hartford and Connecticut area. And how we make it, we make what we do through a relentless focus on Kaizen. And I'm sure we'll get more into that.
Yeah, we sure will.
That is what's a little bit different about Whitcraft than maybe some of those peers I just spoke of.
So we'll get into it in a little bit, but maybe for anyone that doesn't know, what is Kaizen?
Kaizen is a focus on continuous improvement through removing waste. The word lean, a lot of people use. We prefer to use the word Kaizen. It's more back to the Toyota production system kind of roots that the word comes from, and our philosophy's based on. So that's
where it's
our
at.
Focus.
So listen, before we get into the what, and I definitely do want to talk about your kind of Kaizen journey and the giant focus Witcraft has on continuous improvement and why you think it's so important. And I know you like to geek out on it. I enjoy it as well. So we'll definitely have plenty of opportunity. But I think let's start off with the kind of the personal a little bit. You've been in manufacturing for 30 years, but you're pretty new to Witcraft, and I think kind of new to the Connecticut manufacturing community. So let's just talk about your personal journey, Doug. How did you get into manufacturing, and what's inspired you to stay in it and be so great at it for so long?
I actually got into manufacturing at an early age. So my family, my uncle owned a machine shop up in New Hampshire, White Mountains of New Hampshire. And for my teenage years, I was working in the machine shop. And like a lot of second generation folks that are in the machine shop, he kind of pushed me off towards engineering. Mm-hmm. Like, you should go design the stuff we make, not make it. And like a lot of people that went into engineering, they found out that I would rather be making stuff than designing stuff. I've been in manufacturing a long time. Went to engineering school, and right out of there went to work for General Electric. Spent 27 years with GE, and then about 3 years ago, made the leap from the big company to the small company here at Witcraft.
That's awesome. When you were working in your uncle's machine shop, right, and before you even went into engineering, what was it about the machine shop? What was it about the making of things that touched you?
Yeah. There's something to me that was fulfilling about seeing a finished product go out the door. There's just something cool for a manufacturing geek, to use your term, to have a piece of bar stock, in one hand, and in the other hand, you have that finished part that's going into somebody's assembly, whether it's part of an engine, part of a, spectrometer, whatever it's going into. It's just interesting to know that you could take a piece of metal and turn it into something, or in my case, obviously there's things made of wood and all kinds of other materials, but most of my career has been around metal.
Metal fab, yeah. It is interesting, and I don't, something I've never, maybe it is unquantifiable, and maybe it's just having the experience, but there is something magical about taking something and transforming it into something else. And it's something we've talked about on the podcast before that I think we lose when we just walk around and don't realize that everything we touch in our life, the table, the chair, the door, the coffee cups, the watch, the clothes, somebody made that. Someone designed it, and then someone took something and made it into something else. It's cool.
Yeah, no, it is. My uncle used to have this saying that, look, there's only two occupations in life where you actually make something of value: farming and manufacturing. Everything else is just kind of serving somebody. So no, that's something that's been fulfilling for me.
And so you went into engineering, and do you remember a period of time where you felt that you wanted to be more the maker than the designer? What was that? Talk about that.
I remember very specific. I actually did now a customer of ours, but I did an internship with Pratt & Whitney up in North Berwick, Maine, and I spent a summer designing tooling. on a computer, doing design the whole day at my desk. And that was the summer I decided that I did not want to do design. I wanted to make things. I wanted to be out on the shop floor, getting my hands dirty, finding ways to make things and make things better.
Yeah, I mean, listen, God bless engineers. We need them, but everyone's got to be in their right framework. It's interesting, something I thought about. You said, hey, like many second generation manufacturers, and we've talked to second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation manufacturers. I think about Connecticut, and you're from New Hampshire. It's even all in New England. When they talk about it being in the water, it's really more like it's in the DNA and the bloodstream, right? It's so many stories that started off with my dad had a machine shop, my uncle had a machine shop, whatever. Some people said my dad started something in the basement with a Bridgeport, and just being around that, I guess it just like inspires us, right?
I mean, I think it sticks with you, and it's you find an interest in it. It's something you learn about and continue to want to do, and I think it's tough to find fulfilling work. The idea of banking. My father-in-law's a banker, so God love bankers, but
Sure.
It's just not something that I could feel great about getting up every day and feel like I'm creating something.
And when you recognized that passion, you just went after it.
It just always stuck with me. Yeah. And I think the passion came later on in my career, in my early days with GE, the idea of finding a better way to make something. I mean, it's interesting to make things. Mm-hmm. It's even more fun to find a better way to make it. And I'm sure we'll get into that.
So let's talk about your GE journey just really quickly, because I think that's interesting too. You're with a big company. I mean, listen, GE obviously has had some struggles in recent years and whatnot, but I don't think there's any denying that GE is it's a historically great company.
GE is a fantastic company. I would change nothing about the time I spent with GE. I learned a lot. I worked with some really great people, some really sharp people. And to your point, they've struggled as of late. Stock prices kind of in the floor. But they're actually going through what I think is going to be a turnaround. A lot of people ask me, is it a good time to buy GE stock? I think it is. I think they make product that are just going to be around for years and years to come. Jet engines, medical products, and they make really great products. They've had some stumbles in terms of their balance sheet and P&L statement, but the hardcore infrastructure of what they make is what will carry them forward, and it's going to be a great company for a long time to come.
So when you think about, and if you think about most people that listen to this podcast, right, are small manufacturers, small manufacturing leaders, right? I mean, for all I know, the CEO of GE is listening, but certainly not in our mass target market. What do you think a small manufacturer, now that you've been in smaller manufacturing in Connecticut, what is stuff that you lesson learns about what GE does or how they approach it, how a company that's been so successful for so long, what are the lessons you learned that you take with you to Witcraft that you think have been translatable?
I learned a lot at GE. And it's I suppose sometimes it's hard to look at yourself and say, what did I learn that was the most useful? But probably the thing that I relay the most on, that I lean back on as an experience, isn't necessarily what you'd think. A lot of people ask, geez, it must have been stuff you learned about manufacturing processes or, how to understand financial terms, processes. It was really about leadership and how to deal with people. GE was really big on leadership, and I think they set some really great expectations about how to treat the people that work for you, how to grow leaders, how to make sure you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, that are invested in what you're going after. That's probably where I, frankly, still call back the most when I'm looking for 2 cents from some of my mentors in GE. We're usually talking about people, not necessarily about financial numbers or engineering, but it's all about leadership and people. It's
important, right? I mean, even in manufacturing, right, where a lot of people can, I don't want to say mistakenly, but put a lot of focus on the parts and the part processes, which is important. But at the end of the day, even with automation, even with Industry 4.0, even with 5-axis CNC and all that stuff, ultimately it comes down to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Every company, most companies, unless you own a storage facility, I guess, is made up of people. Mm-hmm. And the degree that the company is going to be successful is based on, in a perfect world, I want every single employee of Witcraft walking in the door in the morning or in the afternoon, feeling really inspired, feeling like they're part of something that they're proud to be a part of, and that there's something that we're trying to accomplish as a team that they feel like they're contributing to, right? I mean, that's the goal.
Yeah. When you think about your job as CEO, Doug, where does that part, that dream, that idea of having, and I'm a little bit going to restate it and maybe hopefully I'm not putting words in your mouth, but of having the whole team rowing in one direction, being excited about the vision of where they're going and coming into work and being pumped to be a part of it. Where does that fit into the hierarchy of what the CEO at Witcraft should be doing?
I mean, I think that's part of what a big part of my job is to make sure that there's a clear mission, right? Our mission at Witcraft is to be the best aircraft engine component manufacturer in the world through a relentless focus on Kaizen. And it's a pretty simple mission. And it's one that our company mission is around this idea of making product better. It's one that I know our employees can become all in on, that they can get passionate about. And it's my job every day to make sure that everybody understands that mission and that I give everybody an opportunity to be a part of that mission. And, that's what I hope the people that walk in the door every day and go to work at Witcraft feel good about.
And so from that perspective, getting that mission, getting people on board, that building people, top on your list of things you got to be doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Top on my list, top on my team's list. We look at the organization structure of Witcraft. We talk about it as like an upside down org chart. I'm a big proponent. We are big proponents of servant leadership. We see my job as being kind of at the bottom of the hierarchy, where I'm there to support my team and make sure. And how do I support them? I make sure that we're clear about what we're trying to accomplish. When you get 1,200 people like we do, if you're not really clear about what we're trying to do, then you can have people, going in the wrong direction and working really hard to do it. So you want to make sure everybody's aligned, and the better you can clarify your mission and be simple about it, the better that happens. And my job is to support the folks that work for me, because their job is to support the folks that work for them. And at the very top of the chart within the company are the folks that are actually touching and making product. That's what we're all about. Mm-hmm. And the question I try to leave everybody with anytime I'm doing any kind of review, talking to anybody, is how can I help? And if there's one thing I want everybody to be saying to the team they support is, how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? That's got to be the goal.
Yeah, man. How can I help you? Best 5 words leaders need to know.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, because I think one of the challenges I've thought about as I prepared for our conversation is, it's one thing to build a culture from a company that you've started and you've hired everybody and do all that. But for those that don't know, Witcraft has been built largely, I think it's fair to say, through acquisitional growth. Not that you guys haven't focused and been successful organically growing, but a big part of the growth story for Witcraft over the last 10, 15 years, whatever, I think has been through acquisitions, correct?
It's been a big part of it. Yeah. We've had some organic growth. Mm-hmm. I think you've had my buddy Colin Cooper in here
a couple of times,
who's told the story of Witcraft. Terrific guy, a great mentor of mine. Frank, I think as I told you, I was a little scared about coming in. Those big shoes to fill. But the quick history of Witcraft: it was started up in northeast of Hartford in a farm area, Eastford.
Yep.
A guy named Mickey Wittenberg, hence the name Witcraft, was making go-karts in his barn, and from the 1960s when he got started till 1998, it was relatively small, less than 50 or so people.
When did they switch from go-karts to airplane parts?
They switched from go-karts to airplane parts in the 70s.
Okay.
As story goes, he had a neighbor that was an engineer at Pratt & Whitney, mm-hmm. who needed some quick development, fabrication, sheet metal work done over the weekend. This guy was making go-karts. He came and saw Mickey, and Mickey helped him out, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah.
In 1998, private equity was brought in by Colin Cooper and mm-hmm. his partner Jeff Paul to bring Witcraft into this kind of next generation where they started doing acquisitions. Mm-hmm. And from 98 until I joined 3 years ago, I think they did a total of about 6 acquisitions that brought the company to a total of 4 major footprints, all around Connecticut with one in Massachusetts. Over the last, and when I joined 3 years ago, there was about 600 employees. Over the last 3 years, we've done 6 more acquisitions, and actually most of them in the first 2 I was there. We haven't done much in the last year. That's brought us all the way up to 1,800 employees, and then with COVID, we've actually back down to 1,200. So a lot of growth through acquisition, mm-hmm. Which was, part of our philosophy was to find opportunities where we're similar products, similar markets, similar processes, but where we could bring value through implementing kind of our philosophy of manufacturing around Kaizen.
So actually, that's two things. Let me jump into the Kaizen because I think that's really important. But right before we get to that, I just want to say one thing. So now we're looking at Witcraft being a combination of essentially 12 companies. I think if I added those sixes and sixes, right about there. So when you're thinking about, if we got people listening to this podcast who maybe they're not thinking about integrating 12 companies just yet, but maybe they bought one or they're thinking about buying one or merging with another business. How have you thought about, or how do you think about getting that one culture and getting that together? Where does that start on that planning, and how does it execute?
So in the 6 companies that I've been involved with, we quickly go in, and within hopefully the first few weeks, it was a challenge with our very last acquisition, because our last acquisition was about 2 weeks before the CDC announced that we had an official pandemic. But with the prior acquisitions, within the first few weeks, we'll go in with a team of our KPO, which is a Kaizen promotion office. It's kind of our core central group of folks that practice Kaizen. And it's typically folks from every other site, and we'll go in and we'll do a Kaizen workshop. Literally somewhere between 4 and 6 teams, typically focused on things like building single-piece flow lines to as simple as doing 1S, organizing and standardizing the floor. And through the process of working hand in hand with those employees, they quickly get a sense of what our culture is, how we work, what we're all about in terms of single-piece flow and our mission of Kaizen. What we don't do, I generally don't go stand in a conference room and say, here's the mission of Whitcraft and here's what we stand for. I go and roll up my sleeves and work beside the folks. And they pick it up better that way. They get a sense of what we're all about very quickly.
Do you feel like you need to tell them? Is there a presentation about like, hey, this is what Kaizen is. This is why we do it. We're going to come in here and we're going to roll up our sleeves and go shoulder to shoulder to help you do it. You just come in and do it. Like, how does that?
Yeah. So part of our philosophy of being, we call in the Gimba, which means in the shop floor. We're not big proponents of offices and conference rooms. I don't have an office. I work out of a backpack and I travel from site to site. Most of my team that support, we call it shared support, COO, CFO, they don't stay in a specific location. And when we're in a facility, we try not to use conference rooms because to me, that's not where manufacturing happens. And that's just part of the philosophy of the total production system. So no, we don't bring them in a conference room and kind of go through a lot of PowerPoint slides about what our mission is. And we hit some of that as we're talking to them, but it's really mostly being on the floor, rolling up our sleeves and helping them solve problems. Again, trying to be that servant leader so that they quickly get a sense of, oh, this is what these guys are about. We feel like we're successful if when we leave one of the sites, particularly if it's a new one and we're trying to get them integrated, if they feel like there's things that we got done by being there. And we'll sometimes bring in 12 or 15 people that they couldn't have done without us. And literally about rolling up our sleeves and cleaning the place up, fixing the facility, putting in single-piece flow lines.
That's got to make them feel really good. So now, listen, we're going to have to do it now. So let's explain for anyone that doesn't understand. Can you? This could go on for hours, so I don't know how to summarize the Kaizen and the total production system. But could you maybe explain it to folks that don't fully appreciate what it is, and just kind of start with what it is, and then let's talk about why and how Witcraft has embraced it so much.
So, and it is very hard to describe.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to. Typically, when somebody comes to one of our shops and they say, hey, I want to understand more about Kaizen, I say, meet me in Eastford, and I'll walk you around the shop, and then you'll understand by seeing. But Kaizen it's a philosophy, and it is stolen from Toyota. We work with a sensei, a consultant, who was an original disciple of Taiichi Ohno, who was the father of the Toyota production system. And that's, he was a while ago. Taiichi Ohno passed away years ago. The gentleman we work with is 83 years old. Had we not had COVID, we would have had him for about 12 weeks this year, working with our team. The principles that we focus on they're pretty simple. It's continuously trying to find ways to take out waste in building single-piece flow lines. And what I mean by single piece flow lines is we try to make product all in one physical flow line where you go from raw material. And in the case of metals, which is what we mostly deal with, we call it raw stock, whether it's plate stock, bar stock, till we have a finished product. And that's our focus, is to find most of our acquisitions. When we go in, they're doing what we call batch and queue. They're making product in the hundreds or even thousands. And there's that product, if it has a 2-month cycle in a plant or a lead time in a plant, in that 2 months, it's probably only being touched for about 1 hour. And the rest of the time, it spends what we call sleeping, right? Batch is it gets touched in large quantities. Queue is where it's sleeping for most of the time. We try to create single piece flow lines where the part's literally moving the entire time and you're adding value the entire time. And you're going from maybe a 2-month lead time to a 1 hour lead time. And probably the best way to describe what I'm talking about is I'll give you a quick story.
Please.
About a part. We have an acquisition we did. Actually, it was the first one I had when I came here. It's a company called AccuCut, Southington, Connecticut. Great little business, owned by a couple brothers that picked it up from their dad, who the Barmore brothers. A terrific business. Sharp employees, mostly in the process of doing EDM service work for other manufacturers around Hartford. They had won a development product for the geared turbofan, which is ends up on the Pratt & Whitney engine, for what's called a swirler. It swirls fuel going into the combustor of an engine. It's a very complex little part that would fit in the palm of your hand. They were manufacturing it by doing one process in their house and then sending it around New England to have about 7 other processes done in batch by 7 other manufacturing houses. And they would send it out and bring it back between every one because they had to do an inspection and sign off paperwork. And so the lead time on this product was like 90 days. And they were pretty happy about that. It had been almost 6 months when they first started. We came in, Witcraft did, and we said, hey, we're going to build a single piece flow line. We're going to do this all in-house, and we're going to do it in a single flow line. And today, if you were to go there, and it took us about 2 years to get it all done. We start with bar stock. It goes through a turning operation. I'm going to get a little geeky here.
Yeah, please.
It then goes through an EDM operation. It then goes through a bench operation, the first ever FPI operation. It then goes into a weld operation, a braze operation, and a final pressure test operation. And then it's done. The cycle time's 2 hours. It takes the longest process about 20 minutes. And so every 20 minutes we get a part off the line. We find quality issues as they occur. You know, part of the problem with making things in batches, you find a quality problem and you have
got a whole
1,000
dead batch.
parts.
Yeah.
Wrong. So we went from 90 days lead time to literally an hour, and every 20 minutes a part comes off. And the inventory went from carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars in inventory down to almost nothing. Our cost, we have today, actually I was there this morning, one person's running this flow line. It used to be people all over New England. Our cost is about 20% of what it used to be when we first made the product. That's an example of single piece flow. And that's the way we try to approach all of our batch and queue shops, is to set up these single piece flow lines. And it's just a continual focus on how we can get better.
Is there an underlying characteristic of the part or the process that needs to be in place for a single piece flow line to work? Like, does it have to be low volume, high complexity? Does it have to does it work for any? Yeah. You can, I can tell by your face you know where I was going, so I'll stop and let you.
No, that's funny though, because that's typically what we hear. I mean, look, everybody understands lean. I shouldn't say everybody does, but if you're in manufacturing,
you better.
Yeah, they do. Everyone understands lean. They get the concepts. Usually there's a reason, well, we can't do lean here because, and then the feeling at AccuCut, frankly, was, well, we can't do lean here because we're just a service shop. We're bringing parts out, we're sending it back out. And we said, well, why can't you insource all those operations? Like, we've never welded a part. We've never brazed a part. They didn't have anybody who knew how to do FPI. We do a lot of what's called moonshine, where we build our own equipment. So all those processes I just explained, we build in-house. And that comes out of years of working on getting good at building your own equipment and finding ways. And it's right-sized and it's simple. So we built a welder. This welder wouldn't weld anything other than this swirler, but it does a really good job of welding the swirler.
Sure.
And it was relatively inexpensive to build that piece of equipment. So yeah, we find ways to set up the process so it works just for that part. And, whether it's what we call a large mix of parts, multi-mix flow line, or sometimes there's people that say, look, you can't single piece flow this because we've got this huge oven, and the oven, does things in batches. So you got to put 1,000 parts in there at a time. We go, well, build an oven that's this
Get a
big,
smaller.
and you can make it work.
Right.
That's our focus.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't work if you aren't willing to think outside the box, right? If you're only in the reality that you're in, then maybe it doesn't work. But there's a whole new reality.
There's a philosophy we have that says just try it.
Yeah.
We say, why don't you try to build a little oven? And some people go, how would I ever build an oven? So what do you mean? And we've built ovens. And this goes, back to the team in Eastford is really where all of our focus on Kaizen, getting the story. It started about 8 years ago. And it started before that, but about 8 years ago, we started working with this Japanese consultant. We brought in a woman who actually came out of GE. Her name is Jackie Gallo. I think you've met her before.
I met Jackie, yeah.
She was the lean leader for all of GE Aviation. And she decided for various reasons to come to a smaller company, Witcraft, and she brought with her this consultant from Toyota who started working in Eastford and teaching them moonshine. And she brought in somebody from Pratt & Whitney who was also a zealot, a guy named Steve Ruggiero, around Kaizen. And then the two of them started finding other zealots. I was one of them. Nowhere near as smart as Jackie and Steve on Kaizen, but they pulled me in for kind of the same reason. And Eastford has just become this really great, breeding ground for equipment and philosophies. And we bring all of our leaders that when we do an acquisition, we bring them all to Eastford and kind of show them how we want to run the company.
So when you think about Witcraft, it's not a secret, right? But that's the special sauce. That's
the special sauce. Yeah. If I could, the best way to describe what's special, when I first interviewed for this role 3 years ago, I was supposed to go meet with Colin. I went to Eastford, and the idea was I was going to the shop floor for 45 minutes, and I was going to walk around with Steve Ruggiero, who was at the time the general manager of Eastford. And then I was supposed to go meet with Colin for about 45 minutes later. I got there at 2 o'clock, and I was supposed to be with Colin, I think, at 2:45. At 5 o'clock, Colin came down on the floor, I think, looking for me. And I was still down there with Steve. And just, just in love. I fell in love with what they were working on. I had worked with these guys from Toyota in my years at GE, but never had we been allowed to kind of take the cuffs off and do the things that they've done in Eastford with building right-size equipment, building single-piece flow lines. Words can't describe it.
It's different.
Yeah, it's different.
When you're doing the acquisition thing and you're talking to potential companies, since this Kaizen thing's so important, does that inform what a good acquisition target looks like for Witcraft?
It's funny when we've talked to acquisitions, and there's times where if they know about Witcraft and especially if they've been to Eastford, they say, geez, we're nervous that you may not be interested in us because we're not that lean. And it's almost the opposite. We say, look, we obviously love a company where there's lots of opportunity. So a great company to us is one that's got good product in our markets, right? So we're not interested in getting off into different markets. We want to stay in the aircraft engine component.
So no Superman mug manufacturing?
Probably not.
Okay.
No, it's probably not our market. We wouldn't know the customer base. And it's our processes, right? We deal with metal.
Sure.
So if it meets those three things, then, we're all about trying to fix things and get away from batch and queue. It's very rare we go into a shop that isn't batch and queue. Mm-hmm. So that's not something for anybody to feel, embarrassed of. And frankly, we're not there. Everybody's on a journey. Mm-hmm. Witcraft is not there. I could take you into our shops today and I could show you, hey, here's where some areas we still do batch and queue. We haven't got 100% away from it. It's a journey. It's more about the product, the markets, than it is about where they are on that journey.
Right. So, and I would imagine to some extent, the earlier they are in the journey, the more value you can add more quickly.
The more synergy. Yeah. Our private equity guys like to call that synergy.
Yeah.
And they put dollars to it. But there's a lot of opportunity. Yeah. It's a good thing.
So I'm just curious, a lot of people in Connecticut are in multi-generational businesses, maybe thinking about selling. Maybe they want to be a part of something, bigger. I don't know. I just think it'd be interesting. Maybe you could explain what's the experience like becoming part of Whitcraft for somebody that is out on their own right now? What does that look like?
Look, we've had 6 acquisitions, and some of the owners stick around. Some have. The Barmore brothers that we acquired, AccuCut, stayed around with us for a couple of years. And others decide that, look, whether they're at a certain age or they've got something on in their life that the day they sell, they decide to move on. I think the feedback you'd have from the folks that stuck around is that by and large, we were upfront about it's going to feel different. Number one, because you're becoming part of another company, right? I mean, I don't care how focused we are on servant leadership and trying to make sure that we're supporting the plant. When you have full autonomy to run your own shop and all of a sudden you're part of a bigger organization, it's different. Mm-hmm. There's a little less autonomy. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. But I think by and large, those that stuck around understood that we had this selfless kind of approach, and we were really all about the process. And again, those first interactions where we showed up and we were, how can we help? There's been largely a positive relationship with those folks, and they've felt that we added value. It's been a good thing.
What about the rank and file? I know a lot of people I've talked to, I know people have sold their business, people have bought businesses. And I don't know that a lot of people know this who don't sort of travel in business owner circles, but almost universally, every business owner I've ever known cares a lot about their people, especially as they get towards that later part of their career where they're maybe thinking about selling or even just retiring, frankly. One of the biggest concerns I know of people in that situation that we've talked about is what's going to happen to my people? Who's going to take care of them? How do you guys honor that legacy? Because I'm sure the businesses that you buy, they care about that.
That's been clearly one of the big questions from all of the owners that, we've done an acquisition. We make a few commitments to the owners. We will never profit off a change to an employee's benefits or pay. The first thing that employees always ask me that are being acquired is, are you going to change pay and benefits? You're going to change, when I say benefits, I don't mean just medical, but vacation, 401k, all those things. And in some cases we have to, right? You've got to bring them on your own 401k. You can't leave them on theirs. And there are slight changes they go through. We try really hard never to have any of the financial benefit that comes through an acquisition come out of the pocket of the employee. Really hard to make that happen. And you could talk to, many of our acquisitions, and hopefully they would attest to that. And I stand in front of those employees point by point and explain to them how we're going to make sure that happens. To the point where, if we have a different monthly premium than they used to have, we'll make it up in their paycheck, because we're just not going to take money out of their pocket. So that's number one, is that we get that off the board. So we're not here to, raid anybody's pockets on this thing. Number two is our philosophy around trying to be good servant leaders, trying to empower the employees, and trying to be there to help and be hands-on generally is accepted very positively, both by the seller as well as the employees that are coming. Now, in the last year, unfortunately, like a lot of companies, we've had to have some reduction. So there's been employees that were negatively impacted through that. Brutal year. We, as I said, we were 1,800 employees, and we unfortunately had to get down to 1,200. So I'm certain that those 600 employees aren't feeling great about, what went on. But look, I look my employees in the eye that are still here and say, had we not done that, and had we not been as aggressive as we were, had we not been as proactive, we tried to do it soon in this pandemic, then we would not have necessarily preserved the jobs that we did. Yeah.
Listen, it's a tough subject, and having to sit in those chairs and make those decisions as well. It's never easy, and you got to try and do the best you can. And global pandemic's really outside of anybody's control. So we gotta make the decisions to keep those 1,200 jobs that we do have. So I get that. Talk a little bit about, you're talking about the moonshine. You're talking about the buy into the Kaizen, the single piece flow. It seems to me, now not having been there, but it seems to me that in order to make these things work, you got to have really talented, engaged people. What's your view on the workforce you've seen in Connecticut and their level of engagement, their level of skill? I mean, you come from a bigger world at GE, international global company. You've seen it. I'm just curious your take on the Connecticut workforce and where we stand in terms of skill and capabilities.
Yeah, Connecticut has a terrific workforce. I mean, obviously, I've only worked in certain small sampling of the folks in Connecticut, but I did even in my GE tenure. I spent a couple years running an acquisition that GE made of the old Dynamic Gunver business out of Manchester. To the point you made earlier, there's a lot of third, second, generation employees that have grown up in manufacturing, whether it's sheet metal fabrication, machining, welding, just a pipeline of really talented tool makers that I've had the opportunity to witness around Connecticut. And yes, most of those folks are used to kind of the batch manufacturing, but when it comes down to actually cutting metal, shaping metal, welding metal, the processes don't change. It's all about how you line those processes up is the things we're trying to get after. And so, we love the employees we have, and I think Connecticut is. And I've lived my 30 years, 27 years with GE. I was in 8 different locations up and down the East Coast. I would put Connecticut up with anywhere I've been, Maine, New Hampshire, Florida, out in Ohio, in terms of the employees that you've got and their skill set. I mean, a lot of really good technical skills. Now that said, our employees tend to be towards the backside of their careers, right? And I think that's a national problem where we don't have as many. We've got some great 20 and 30 somethings that are second and third generation machinists and welders and are really good. I'd love to have more of them. But
how do you think about building that up? I mean, that's clearly an issue. The silver tsunami, whatever, the aging of the workforce, however you want to describe it, it's a real issue. How do you guys think about that? And just because of a pandemic, and I know you and I kind of bantered a little bit back and forth pre-recording about when do we think the flight miles and the commercial aerospace in particular is going to come back to Q4 19 levels. And I think even at the most optimistic view, it's probably not in 2021. But people are still getting older in 2020. The pandemic doesn't freeze people's ages. So, I mean, how do you think now about that kind of long-term strategy to make sure that, because we talked about how important people are and how important their skill sets are and that talent, how you backfill on that?
Look, I think it was a big problem, and I think it'll become a big problem again. I think we're getting a little bit of a timeout. If you'd asked me a year ago, what's your biggest challenge in terms of growth? I would have said it's having a good pipeline of employees that want to be in manufacturing. And I think that was probably a common response you would have gotten from anybody in the greater, not just Connecticut, but in manufacturing in the United States.
Yep.
We've gotten a little bit of time out on that, right? I've gone down, like I said, by 30% of my employees. On a positive side, we're starting to hire again. And so, it's not a lot, but we're starting to hire again in small amounts. And again, we're finding it a little tough because the folks that really have the good skills, despite the fact that there's been a lot of reductions, those folks are still tough to come by.
Yeah.
So how do we go about solving it? To me, it's with the younger generation.
Yep.
Right? We've got to get more of the folks that are coming out of high school, coming out of secondary school, that want to be in manufacturing. And I think that begins as early as elementary school and middle school, driving an awareness that manufacturing is not that dark, dirty, dingy, the 3 Ds kind of a role that it used to be thought as. I think that's been what's been out there. That's the misnomer that's been out there for the past 20, 30 years. Most folks coming out of high school wanted to go off to college and wanted to do something that wasn't manufacturing. That's something that my father did, and it was dark, dirty, dingy, and that's not where I want to be. That's really not the case. We try to provide a really good experience for the folks that are coming new into manufacturing into Whitcraft, in our little vacuum of how we can impact it. I talked about the KPO. We call it our Kaizen promotion office.
Yep.
This is a group of folks that are from corporate focused on continuous improvement. A lot of them end up building moonshine equipment. And so it's a great place for us to take, whether it's interns out of college or even out of technical schools. We'll bring them in, we'll make them part of the KPO, and they get a lot of hands-on experience building equipment, building lasers, building ovens, building all kinds of things that is just fascinating, fun, We try to make it a really positive experience, and that ends up being our pipeline for whether someone's going to go work on the floor as a welder or machinist, or even into some of the management roles for some of the engineers that come through. Our hope is that the word travels, and that they're telling people Whitcraft's a great place to go do an assignment. Eastford's probably where we've had the most success with that. Central Connecticut, our old Connecticut tool as well. But that's how we're trying to impact it. How I think we could do better as a state and a community. I'm sure Colin Cooper talked about this when he was on, but I think it's trying to reach those early folks that are in elementary school, junior high, getting in front of them, getting them into some of our shops, letting them see that this is some high-tech stuff. You're working with robotics, you're working with lasers, the pay is good. I think a niche opportunity is to get more women that are interested in it. As you probably realize, it's a minority when you go to the engineering schools, the technical schools, usually somewhere between 10 to 25% women. So if we could just get that up to the 50%, there's a huge group of people that I think we could bring into manufacturing as well.
And, I agree with all those opportunities, and this other piece which actually Colin was quoted in this article as I was in the Harvard Business Journal that came out on Monday, talking about sort of the untapped potential of huge amount of younger workforce in the cities in Connecticut that are currently kind of underemployed, that if given the right access, now it's hard to get somebody from Hartford to Eastford, unfortunately, so we got to figure that out. But some real opportunities there, and I think similar to what you mentioned, I think about sort of, you mentioned gender diversity, which I think is a huge opportunity. I think thinking about also sort of like racial and ethnic diversity and inclusion is a huge opportunity to get some folks that could really sink their teeth into something and get on board with that. And hopefully this podcast helps. I mean, we're one of our goals has been to get out there and help people to see that it is lean, green, and clean, manufacturing. And it's not the dark, dirty, dingy days of yesteryear. It's funny, actually.
Lean, green, and clean. I like that.
There you go. Yeah, the governor ripped it off, and he said it was double green because not only is it environmentally friendly, but it's well paying. So double green. So we can take that. But yeah, that's absolutely a part of what's going on. I know we're running a little bit out of time, but just a couple quick, kind of circle back questions. People think of lean sometimes, and there's two parts of this or Kaizen, pardon me, that I want to just dovetail into. I think there's still a little bit of fear that lean means less people. That if we Kaizen our facility and we single piece flow, we don't need all this, we're going to need less employees. That's not what I've seen. Mm-hmm. And I think that the data bears that out, that companies that have embraced Kaizen or have embraced lean over a period of time, and same with automation and robotics, when you look at those companies over a decade, I think there was a study that was done in the 90s and in the early aughts that showed companies that invested in that actually grew. So they are the ones that grew employment. Companies that didn't invest in technology, didn't invest in Kaizen and process improvement, they shrank in their business and shrank in employment, which from my perspective is obvious, but I'm curious kind of your perspective on that.
I think the agreement that you've got to make with your team as you're going on this journey of Kaizen is that, look, transparently, if you implement single piece flow on a given product, you're going to have less people involved afterwards than you did before. You just are. That example I told you of the swirler at AccuCut, there was probably the equivalent of 5, 6, 7 people touching that part. Granted, all over New England. Now, we insourced it, so that brought more work into that one shop. But the agreement you're making with those folks is it's going to lead to more growth. Mm-hmm. If you're the lowest cost, on that part, if you're the best quality on that part, then your customer is going to send you more work, and it's going to open the doors for more opportunity. I fundamentally believe that our single best marketing we have is when we bring a customer into Eastford and we show them how we make parts. They walk through a single piece flow line, and it's powerfully, inspiring to them to say, this has got to be the best way to make a part. And so they want to put more work there. So it's the growth. Yeah, the agreement with the employees is, look, yes, we're going to have less people per part, but we're going to have more parts to make. And that's the end of the story.
And that's got to be it right there, because I think almost going back to the idea of like sometimes when you have to make tough decisions about employment cuts during a pandemic or a global recession or whatever, the unspoken truth there is, listen, I got to make these cuts now so that we can be around to bring those people and more back in the future. And I think the companies that don't invest in technology and don't invest in improving themselves in terms of the quality of the products that they make aren't going to be around for a long time.
That's right.
You can only cut so far.
That's right.
And then I think that's really a challenge. It seems like you guys have embraced that and got your team embracing it.
It's absolutely core to our philosophy in terms of there's always a way to get better. And yes, getting better, part of it does mean you're going to have less labor in each one of the parts, but there's a fundamental belief that that's going to bring more growth. And so far it has. I mean, we've grown. Your point about acquisition, we've had growth there, but just within Eastford, which basically making the same product, just more of it for different customers. 8 years ago, when we kind of started on this journey, it was about a 150 person shop, and today there's well over 300 people there.
Case in point right there. No, absolutely. The other thing I want to ask you about, which I don't think is talked enough about, and I'll take some responsibility, I'm going to make it a bigger part of this podcast, but what's your view on Kaizen, not just on the manufacturing floor, but in the rest of the business?
Yeah, Kaizen for us is about removing waste anywhere there's a process. And so we do Kaizen workshops. Quite often we'll have anywhere from 4 to 6 teams, and we always have 1 or 2 teams that are focused on a business process. I guess the best way to explain it is through an example. We have a process around bringing in new product. Mm-hmm. And it's not about making the product, it's about designing the process. Right, so you get a drawing from one of our customers, and we have to design a process to make that. We have to make a prototype part, and in this industry, you've got to get that part inspected, analyzed, and approved by the customer. Typically, they cut it up. Sometimes they stick it in an engine and actually run it. It used to take us almost 12 months from getting that print until we could actually get production approved on a process. And a big part of that was we had all these sign-offs. Everybody had anybody that's got a workflow has this, whether you're signing off a new part that's coming in or you're signing off a requisition. We changed the process so that rather than having the work product float from desk to desk and sit in queue, again, batch and queue, somebody would take, all right, I'm going to sign my 10 requisitions and pass them off to the next person. We now bring everybody together in a quick stand-up huddle, and they go through, they can ask each other questions, and everybody signs off simultaneously. So something that used to take weeks to float across people's desks now gets done in a matter of minutes. And that's a very small example, but that's just one example of how we take the same philosophy we do with product and we apply it to business process.
It's so important, and I think it's a hugely untapped opportunity that so many Connecticut manufacturers have, is to take that same production floor mindset and start applying it to other places. And I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I think that, so I'll ask the question, Kaizen always works, but you can get a lot of lift early, right? Like we talked about with the acquisitions. When someone hasn't been doing it or is very early in it, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, I would think, to fix. So if you've been doing it a long time on your production floor, sure, there's always more, but they're harder. It's harder to mine those gold nuggets because you've hit it. Whereas you look at your business processes, there's probably low-hanging fruit all over the place that could really make an impact.
Yeah, no, again, batch and queue is not just a mistake that we make with product. We make it with information. Yeah. Almost every business has workflow, has something that gets passed through the business, whether it's purchase orders or requisitions, right? And if you go look at the process for how that flows through your business, I'm sure it's ripe with opportunity to take out waste.
Yeah, listen, hopefully people that are listening are taking that to heart and thinking about ways to do it and who their next sensei is going to be. Before we go to rapid fire, I did want to ask you kind of one broader question. You talked about, when it comes to workforce development, Witcraft's doing your little part in your little part of the world, which is terrific. And I think, Colin Cooper as the chief manufacturing officer for the state, clearly that's not a Witcraft role, but, I think that just shows the type of community involvement and engagement that he instilled in his role when he was running Witcraft to then go and do that. Cause he didn't have to do that, right?
No.
That shows sort of community engagement. And
I think if his wife had a note in it, maybe she was looking forward to spending a little more time with him than she is.
That's probably true. What I'm curious about is your perspective on collaboration, not just inside of Witcraft, not just inside of the organizations you guys have purchased and the ones you will purchase in the future and your employees, but what's your view on the importance of collaboration across industry? What's the importance of manufacturers in Connecticut banding together to make the future that we want happen? Is that important?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And I think actually, unlike some other areas where we're a little more spread out, we've got shops in remote parts of Georgia. We've got a shop in Utica, New York. Here in Connecticut, there's a kind of this underground connection of leaders that we all talk to each other. You were, mentioning some of the leaders, Bryne, others. A good example of that was when this COVID pandemic kicked off. We were all looking for direction. When it came to what's the right protocol to let my employees come into the shop, I had probably 4 or 5 other leaders of businesses around the area. Some I was connected to through ACM, others just happened to know through supplier relationships, but that we were all talking to each other and bouncing ideas off each other and kind of deciding what the right way was to test our employees, to let them in the door with, taking their temperature, et cetera. Were we going to require masks? Were we not going to require masks? Myself, Brian, the leader of the old EDAC company, we were all kind of connecting and talking. And I think there's a lot of benefit that comes through that, whether it's about handling protocol for COVID or even some of this lean. We generally invite a lot of other companies, some of whom we compete with, to come and join our workshops. And we take part in some of what they're doing. So there's a lot of that goes on, and I think it's really, really valuable.
I agree. I mean, listen, it's one of our key theses of the podcast, and one of our goals is to help foster that collaboration. We really do believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, and Eastford isn't competing with Southington, isn't competing with New Haven, isn't competing with Glastonbury. Connecticut and our supplier base, not just in the aerospace grouping, but in general, is competing against the world.
Right.
And we need to work together because we can only win together. And it's been one of my true joys to be able to see how well connected everybody is and how much we're sharing. And I hope that continues. And I'm happy that you're on board that train and participating in that.
Well,
sense.
and you're kind of the unofficial leader of that group.
The collaborator. Listen, Montanari.
You bring us all together.
Right. I do my best. Listen, let's rapid fire round of questions. You ready, Doug?
I as ready as I can be.
All right, here we go. There are right and wrong answers, so we'll see how you do.
It.
Red Sox or Yankees?
Red Sox.
There we go.
Born in Brockton, Massachusetts.
I was hoping. Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Dunkin'.
Staycation or no COVID? So this is time off, not COVID.
Yeah.
Staycation or exotic destination?
Staycation.
What's your staycation location?
Lake Winnipesaukee, where we're
where you're building your house.
Yeah.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
SUV.
Do you have a favorite business book?
I got a couple. Art Byrne wrote a book called The Lean Turnaround. Not, I hope he doesn't hear this, not a great written book, but the perspective that it comes from is a small business owner trying to drive Kaizen using the very same kind of Toyota production principles that we're all about. So it's just a really, really good book that hits close to home. Not the best written books. You kind of
listen. I feel that I had a couple people around this office read this book called Start Ugly. It's big print and it's a fast read. It is not going to win a Pulitzer Prize, but the message is great, right? Which is don't get stuck playing, don't get in the boardroom. You're not going to really know how any plan works until you execute it. So just get something going, start it ugly, and then iterate or dismiss it, because the most data you're going to get is what happens, right? And what do they say? No plan survives first contact with the enemy.
Yeah.
So
Art's book is what's great about it is that it's not perfect, and that it's very much it sounds like you're sitting at the bar talking to him about what he did with his company. So it's a good
hopefully
read.
it comes with a beer. If you could do anything other than being the CEO of Whitcraft and you had to do something else, Doug, what would you do?
Wow. That's a tough one. Before I got into manufacturing, my one other potential was I wanted to go teach high school and coach football. I realized that there was more money and a longer career in this, and so I ended up spending my last 30 years in manufacturing. But it wouldn't surprise me if in my retirement I find my time doing that.
That's pretty cool. It's a very lucky guy who gets to do both of his dreams. What's one thing that you learned early in your life, Doug, that you think helped propel you to all the great success that you've had?
Hard work brings about more good luck.
No doubt about that. What's one thing, Doug, that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Doug, and if he'd listen to you, it'd really make a positive impact on his career or life trajectory?
I don't know if old Doug is still perfect at this. I'm pretty sure he's not. But that I should take time to slow down and listen to people. I think a lot of us that are of relatively high energy that want to try to get a lot done, you got to slow down and make sure you're picking up on it's the people side of things that you can miss if you're not paying attention.
Dude, that's very well said, Doug. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Great. It's been terrific. Thank you.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct.
As always, thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a community where we can learn and grow together. Your input, feedback, and engagement is critical to making that happen. Please do comment, like, and subscribe so more and more people can hear what we're doing and join our community of growth and success. Thanks so much for tuning in. Talk to you again soon.